de concealrei a nostra. Dana zas edge.
Alright, so we all know about the failure of the Sega Saturn in Western markets. Now, the console was never really able to meet its full potential as a very capable machine that it was, but today I want to talk about a game that is perhaps the console's most legendary failure, Panzer Dragoon Saga. Now, when I say failure, I'm not saying this is a crap game, don't worry about that, but this incredibly ambitious RPG released in 1998 for a console that was completely dying in Western markets meant that very few copies were sold. Let alone pressed. I mean, there's not going to be some random pile of unsold copies buried in the desert like E.T. This game just simply didn't get a very wide release. We all know what that means though. This game worth $30 to $50 in Japan has exploded in price over the years and has become the rare Saturn game, on top of the ladder of good but stupidly expensive games on the system. It doesn't help that this never got re-released, and with the source code apparently being lost a long time ago, it's hard to see this game ever truly getting its day in the sun. Now, I got very lucky with a copy of this game. It got offered to me for better than mates rates, and I couldn't pass up a chance to play what many consider to be the best game for the system, so let's take a look and see if it's as legendary as they say. Alright, settle in. This is a pretty ambitious story, so I'll try not to get lost.
Cuidado, Edge.
Nihil de inserentia.
So our story begins with our main guy, Edge, having a yarn with his mate, Rua. They're both here to guard this mine without any real information as to what's there, as are orders by the Empire. Rua's advice is to simply not ask questions, or we won't be alive for long. We're rudely interrupted by something going on down in the mine, but before that, a little bit of context as to what's going on here. Thousands of years have passed since the fall of a utopian civilization, with survivors living in fear of biological weapons created by ancient technologies. That all sounds fucked. However, the Empire was able to rise to power with the ancient technology and start anew, driving away the nightmarish creatures with great weapons found in the dormant ruins. With this new power came war, and the Empire chose to fight neighbouring nations, causing an arms race to help defeat their enemies. Now, these fellas from the Empire seem to be on their way to the mine, but we're not having the best time trying to fight this monster. After a bit of messing about, the monster tries to attack us, exposing a girl in the wall in the cave. We're not getting rid of our blue balls just yet though, as this monster needs to go down. We managed to take this fucker down, but while all seems well, these guys from the Empire show up and decide they're going to be fucking bad guys for this story. We wake up to find them taking the girl, and then we get shot into this pit, and this guy thinks it's just fucking hilarious. Meanwhile, the baddies led by this dude called Kramen just straight up level the capital of the Empire, and the dude in charge just doesn't even give that much of a shit. He's just more interested in getting to this place called the Tower.
Faniba Kramen, Norgeskerde Banyara Praia Teriu. Seduva Eskatanaus Gurigu Origu.
I'm getting the impression that everyone here is going to be a piece of shit. I mean, how many people just died and this guy doesn't even care? Anyway, we set our name and get ready to go through this cave, because we ain't dead yet. We have a brief look around, but it looks like we're not alone. Luckily, something comes out of the dark to save us. It turns out it's a dragon, who must think that we're pretty cool, so we head off with it. Flying is easy to get used to, so we head back to where all this shit went down. We find our captain, and he's insistent that we go after this Kramen guy, who is part of the special force of the Empire who leads the Black Fleet. Now, the captain reckons we're fucking dead unless we get that girl back. He gives us a piece of paper, but dies before he can tell us what it is, so off we go, I guess. After a rock-solid tutorial, we're ready to fuck up dudes for real, so let's go. We're having a pretty good time getting settled into this awesome combat system, but these canyons seem to go on forever, until we find this guy running away from the brain dude from MDK2. God, I hated that cunt. Anyway, he's having a pretty rough time, so we step in and help him out in what turns out to be a pretty cool little boss fight. Once that's out of the way, we go have a chat with our new mate. Now this bloke reckons we should be using our dragon to fight the Empire, and he's what's called a seeker, basically a thief who ain't too keen on the Empire. He's gonna need some help getting home, so we agree to give him a lift back to his joint. Oh, and his name's Gash. Fucking classic.
俺の名はガッシュ。本名はスキアド・オプス・ガッシュって言うんだが。なあ、ガッシュでいい。
Upon entering the village, we find that they've been attacked too, and everyone is dead. Obviously, Gash is keen to find out why, but first we decide to make camp here for the night. Well, it's not quite what I had in mind when I said I wanted a hot night with some Gash, but why are we camping outside? Can we use one of the buildings? Anyway, we have our little fireside chat and find out that Gashi is looking for the Divine Visitor, but decides not to tell us much else. The next morning, we give our dragon a fancy new name and head off through the desert with Gashi helping us navigate. We come across this giant monster called a Latham, and to find its weak spot, we have to do some digging. This fucker does some serious damage if you're in the firing line, but we manage to grind down his health, and eventually we make our way to an underground passage to get us past the desert, but this easy way through has this massive monster and about a 10-minute boss fight follows. This fucker is tough, but after using all our health items, we managed to grind his health down to not kill it, but make an escape at least. From here, Gashi is keen to head off on his own, but he gives us something to take east and show some traders. We part ways and head off to the caravan where we chat to this bloke about what we're doing.
なんだ、ガッシュの仲間が。
Yeah, nah, let's cool the jets there, mate. More acquaintances. Now, this bloke gives us some handy info and tells us Kramen fucked their shit up, then went to this place called the Forbidden Zone. Apparently this joint is pretty hardcore, and this guy reckons we should just leave Kramen because he'll probably die there, but we ain't taking any chances, so we have a quick trade with old mate and bugger off to the Forbidden Zone. Here we basically have to fly around and knock these things back to whatever the fuck this is, while getting into a bunch of battles. We repeat this a bunch of times, and eventually we get transported to Kramen's ship, where we take down the guards before battling it out with the big man. Only it's not the big man. Kramen is nowhere to be found.
クレイメンは奴はどこだ。
愚か者め、私はおとりに過ぎん。閣下は今頃塔に。お前はあの時の。
Makes sense. I mean, I still am on disc 1. Anyway, the girl from the mine shows up and attacks us, so we jump back on our dragon to try and reason with her. She ain't listening to us, so we're forced into battle, which can have her hit pretty hard if you stuff up your positioning like I did. Luckily, we can get her weak spot without much trouble, and she backs off. We head back to the caravan, where we do a little bit of trading and have a quick yarn about Zoa's forest and the town nearby, so guess that's our next stop. Here I kinda just ran around like a headless chicken before chatting to this fella at the pub. He served us this absolute bathwater, tastes like Foster's, but we're polite and have a chat about this black ship heading for the tower.
でけえ声出すんじゃねえよ。噂だ噂。
This place is pretty ancient and past the forest, but old mate here doesn't really tell us much else, aside from giving us a picture of the joint and told us to talk to this fella named Payette, who it once belonged to apparently. This bloke's a bit of a wanker and he won't tell us how to get to this place unless we find some parts for him in this area called Georgius. To make matters worse, after we finally get there, take out all the robots guarding the joint and find these parts with this huge ship, fuckwit here says it's not what he's after, so we have to go all the way back again. Looking around the ship, we find an Imperial squadron already there, and they got spooked by us, which of course results in us being captured. Now these guys won't listen to us when we say we're not with Kramen and resort to torturing us by making us listen to the Triple J Hottest 100. We don't say anything though, but they do find a photo of the tower. Luckily for us, old mate Gashi shows up and saves us from this mess. He just happened to be around, just seeing what horrible weapons have been dug up and helps us make our daring escape. He's such a good bloke, he even gives us the ship part we need for that other dickhead. Problem is though, this guy doesn't even want it anymore, and if we'd just shown him our dragon in the first place, he would have fucking helped us already. Oh, and he hasn't even been to the tower, he just reckons he knows where it is, and shows us this machine that he has that can see places without going there, I guess?
こいつはこれを飛ばすことでいながらにして世界のあちこちを見ることができる。
Using this, we see the girl from earlier in an area called Aru, so I guess that's where we're going next. This leads to some pretty cool passages where we have to break these seals to unlock another passage, hopefully to the tower. Problem is, Kramen's men know we're here and these dudes are pissed. Turns out, Kramen's best mate who tried to kill us earlier was waiting for us to activate the Guardians of Aru, and this was just a big trap. Obviously, a battle follows, and this guy can do some heavy damaging and lock you in place for attacks. He's no match for us though, and we eventually grind him down. We open up whatever the fuck this is, but this girl is back for a fight. She doesn't want us interfering with fuckface, but in a twist, we are both thrown from our dragons into this passage with not much light and some nasty looking creatures. We find the girl not in a good way, but while we agree to help her out, we demand some answers in return. She was buy some battle equipment that we can use to fly out of here, so we get moving. This is then followed by like 40 minutes of making our way around long passages unlocking doors. There's really nothing else going on here, although we do find out the dragons were created by people. Crazy. We do manage to eventually get to an elevator that takes us to the surface, but first it's time for some awkward small talk in the elevator where we finally get this girl's name.
そういえば君の名前も聞いてなかったな。
アゼル。
変わった名前だな。
Oh, and apparently she attacked us because she thinks Kramen is trying to save the world, but we reckon that's bullshit. Tell her all the fuck shit he's been up to. We're really interrupted by this monster chasing us out, and it almost has the best of us until our trusty dragon swoops in to save the day. This turns into a pretty long boss fight with a lot of maneuvering necessary, but even after we beat this monster and save Azel's life, she's still threatening us and thinks we're just gonna keep coming after old mate. I mean, no shit. Now, we get back to our camp and that dickhead Payat is still there, obsessed with our dragon. We mentioned that we couldn't get to the tower, and this fog there that we couldn't get past was created by something called Melkava, or God's Passage, and it's there to defend the tower. Apparently we need to destroy it, but he doesn't know where it is. We head over to Zoa, and this bloke out the front hands us this pass into the Holy District, this place over here that we haven't been able to access all game, and meet up with this bloke that's apparently Payat's father. He's not keen on the Empire being around, threatening the town, and wants us to fuck their shit up in exchange for info about accessing the tower.
あのバカ息子の言うことが本当なら君に頼みたいことがあるそのドラゴンで奴らを蹴散らしてほしい
We obviously accept, and this kicks off this really long section where we destroy a few bits and pieces, you know, get into battles, rinse and repeat for 40 minutes, then fuck up this control tower. Goes pretty well, except they're now going to send this explosive to blow up Zoa, and we've only got 7 minutes to stop it. This thing takes a fair few hits, and I didn't think I was going to make it, but it ended up being nothing to worry about, and I blew this thing up with over 2 minutes left on the clock. We go back to old mate, who's arguing with some bloke, and once we tell him we're successful, this other bloke is pissed. He really only wanted us to do this to sway public opinion and help him become a high priest or some shit, and we have to wait until tomorrow for our reward, so we go see Payat, who's got a letter for us. We have no idea who it could be, but they want to meet us, and we have to wait until nightfall to find out who it is.
久しぶりだな。
Well, it was Kramen all along, and he wants us to help him out. It's a shame Payat attacked him before we could hear what he has to say. Moving on to the next day, Payat's father gives us access to this room in the church, which has a device that gives us visions of Melkava and the tower. Payat shows up and gives us some info on how to destroy Melkava, so we head off. This thing is truly massive, and we need to destroy it from the inside. This isn't just as simple as a single power source either, we've got multiple layers to fuck up here. Of course we get the job done, but then Azel shows up again, looking to get her ass kicked again. We aren't keen on killing her, so we just take out the dragon and then take her with us back to Zoa. The only problem is there's something in the distance about to get in our way. The Empire literally then proceeds to wipe out Zoa as we watch on, so we must flee to figure out what we're gonna do, which is immediately come back and fuck their shit up. It's not even that much of a battle either. I mean, we mess up their shit, then when this guy shows up, who's the fella that killed our friends, we just curb stomp him with no real effort. After all that, he's like, yeah, go meet my lord at the tower. Yeah, righto, fuckface, get ready to meet him in hell. We take Azel to the tower and place her in this thing and have a yarn with Kramen. He tells us the purpose of the tower is to create a habitable environment for an already dead planet, and to this day we're protected by the power of the ancient age. Azel is basically the key to use the tower's power, but as we know, Kramen got her before the Empire could and gave her a new objective. We're rudely interrupted by the Empire trying to break in, so we run off for a fight, but not before we remind Kramen we're going to get even with him for the boys later.
僕はまだお前を許したわけじゃない
I mean, I get what he's trying to do, but there was really no reason to be such a dick about it. Anyway, we make our way through endless corridors that you don't need to see and fight the Empire transport ship. This thing is bloody spongy, and if you forget to put your shield on, well, expect a nice dip in health. We eventually blow the bugger up, but things aren't going quite as planned back with Kramen.
ダメだ。
おお、役者が揃ったようだな。クレイメン、貴様には罪を償ってもらう。
This doesn't look good. Kramen tries his hand at getting out of this mess, but misses his shot, so you can guess how this ends for him. Now this knob from the Empire reckons he's about to control the world, but something happens. The room goes dark, and the creature of the tower appears, killing everyone around us. We fight back and manage to put the creature down, then fly out of there, but many creatures of the tower have awoken to fly out towards the Empire's forces. We escape to the caravan where we find a guy who tells us Gash wants us to come to the Seeker's stronghold. At the stronghold, Gash asks us to hand over Azelle so they can take care of her. Ah, that little dickhead Payette is still alive. Happy for him, I guess. Anyway, it turns out Gash is head of the Seekers and they aren't just some Tomb Raiders. They want to destroy the tower and all the other ancient tech to reclaim the Earth somehow. I don't know, but apparently they need us to do it. They need my dragon, as it's the divine visitor, I guess, and according to this other guy, they need Azelle to find this place called Sestrin to destroy all the towers. Gash is a bit of a dick though, because when Azelle wakes up, he's pretty on the nose about what happened to Kramen. No time to dwell on that though, as this giant thing is fast approaching and the creatures from the tower have taken it over, so we head off for battle. This time around it's pretty simple with a two-phase boss fight. It's a little easier than last time once you get into the rhythm. Haha, too easy, cockhead. Back at the Seeker's base, we find out that Azelle has disappeared. We ask around and it looks like she's gone back underground to Uru, meaning that it's back to flying around this giant fucking maze, hoping we end up going the right way. Really, there's barely much of a fight to even be had down here. There's a few enemies, but we just kind of pick her up and take her back to camp, where we have a brief chat and just head straight back to the Seeker's stronghold. I mean, I feel like we could have just helped her find out any of this information without her disappearing. Anyway, Gash reckons it's about time for the Seekers to leave after the devastation caused, but we have unfinished business and want to destroy Sestrin and the tower. Gash isn't keen on us going, but Azelle appears and insists on guiding us as she was destined to do thousands of years ago.
だけど勘違いしないで。それが9世紀に与えられた役目だからじゃないわ。
So we make our way to the tower, and this last section of the game is pretty big. We've got plenty of tough enemies and a fair few long sections between multiple levels. This place feels truly massive, and this whole final run of the game took me like 2 hours. Finally, we reach the bottom floor, where Azelle gets into this machine and tells us to leave to take on Sestrin. We must leave her behind, as only she can destroy the tower. But when we leave, we end up in this really trippy area with a bunch of dragons surrounding us, all of which we have to fight before Sestrin shows up. Once it does, we get shown a bunch of random visions that look like what our dragon's been up to before finding us. No time to dwell on that though, we've got this super drawn out battle ahead of us with this guy. Like, seriously, this fucker's health bar seems to loop forever, but luckily I had plenty of supplies and eventually destroy the beast. Now, after all that, our dragon starts chatting with us. He reckons we are actually the divine visitor, not him, and the dragon was here to help us break the spell of the ancient age and give humans control of their own destiny.
ありがとう。そしてすまない。
そうか。君が僕の中に。君こそが絶対の。
Well, I had a lot of fun with this story. I mean, it's pretty ambitious and there's a lot going on for such an old game. It's definitely worth the effort, but there's so much more to talk about with this one, so let's get stuck into it. The legend of this game is well known amongst a large number of retro game fans, so to start things off, I just want to talk about how ambitious this game feels for the time it was released. You already know you're in for something pretty epic when you see this game is spread over 4 discs. There are heaps of cutscenes in this game to push the story along and help build this world that I really didn't know much about before playing this game. I have the other 2 games before this on Saturn, but I only have the Japanese versions, making it hard to know exactly what's going on. Those games don't exactly have the depth in their stories that we get here either, given that they are just solid rail shooters. This time around, we've got a heap of at times pretty lengthy pre-rendered scenes, as well as a bunch of in-engine stuff and loads of voice acting. Now, aside from a couple of brief parts with the made-up language of Panzerese, this game is all in Japanese, and you will be having to pay attention to the subtitles. This is obviously perfectly fine. I mean, I can only imagine how bad English voice acting could have been, and this is pretty bare bones localization of a game that got fuck all support in the West, so the fact that it even exists is incredible enough. Even the animation is rock solid. I mean, I've seen way worse from games newer than this. The last game I reviewed, Blue Stinger, had way worse to offer than this game, so I'm happy to look past the absolute potato video quality to admire the effort that these guys went to here. Now, the story itself, I rather enjoyed overall. There's enough here to help understand characters' motivations, and the scope of the events really builds as you progress. Azelle is pretty obviously going to be the key to everything, and having her be some created being laying dormant for thousands of years is an interesting aspect of the story. You'll even have opportunities here and there for some extra dialogue with certain characters, allowing you to flesh out certain things and figure out what the fuck's going on. You really start to feel how big this world is and how important it is to not let so much power get into the wrong hands. The warring factions in this world are desperate to have weapons of the past powerful enough to destroy their enemies, and are willing to destroy anything in their path to reach their goal. Kramen being the bad guy that's actually kind of a good guy is interesting, but I still don't really get why he had to be quite so bad at the start of the game. I don't know, maybe he's trying to keep up appearances, but at the same time, everyone else with him is already gonna follow him against the Empire. It's not a major issue. I mean, I could pick apart all sorts of little things, but overall, the package here is pretty killer, and couple that with a rock-solid soundtrack and you're in for a good time. Alright, so we've got some neat animation, cool story. Let's talk about the graphics. Straight up, I would say this is one of the Saturn's best looking 3D games. The previous games on the Saturn showed a good progression of what the console was capable of, and this game is no exception. Character models are pretty blocky, sure, but the dragons, all the enemies, the environments are such a showcase of what we really should have seen a whole lot more of, but as we know, the Saturn wasn't exactly the easiest thing to master for developers. Draw distance is decent enough for the era, and given what's going on, this game is almost never chugging the frame rate. I was really surprised at just how smooth of an experience this game is. Even more surprising was the load times. This game just doesn't struggle with them at all. Everything just moves on nice and smooth. I mean, moving between areas, it just goes black for a few seconds, then it's straight back into it. The usual Saturn quirks are on display here, with plenty of mesh textures, but then randomly some really good transparencies. Fucking hell, this console is weird. It's always funny how they'll get these things to work perfectly in places, but shadows? Fuck it. It's not like these things hurt the experience. I think everything adds its own charm to what is an excellent looking game that performs well within the limitations of the hardware that really never got to see enough of its true potential. At least games like this gave us a glimpse of what could have been. Now, this game is an RPG, but don't go into it expecting a bunch of overcomplicated elements in the design. You'll obviously be leveling up as you go, but the game will automatically add to things like health, damage, special abilities, etc., rather than have you do it manually like a lot more standard RPGs. The main laser shot will get upgraded slowly, allowing you to destroy certain objects that you couldn't before, and over time you'll have your dragon upgrade and change its form. Pretty standard affair in that respect. It's a more streamlined approach to an RPG, and I would say it works well with the overall experience, taking away a lot of potentially overcomplicated elements and creating a more hassle-free experience. The progression feels natural, and the only thing that you really need to keep an eye on is your dragon's combat preferences, allowing you to perform certain moves more effectively or use things like shields. Aside from the RPG stuff, you will have plenty of chances while roaming around this cool map screen to go buy and sell shit. You'll find all sorts of bits and pieces you can trade for weapons, health, temporary power-ups, useful shit. I ended up just hoarding a bunch of the Berserk replenishers, which is a very, very fucking good idea when it comes to the later stage fights, where you'll constantly need to be using a shield move and dealing with guys that have seemingly endless health bars, but I'll get more to that in a bit. The point is, this game works as a casual open-world RPG. Its lack of complicated systems takes away any daunting feeling of needing to learn a lot of in-depth mechanics and just focuses on the casual, fun nature of exploration and combat. Now, this is where the game really shines. The gameplay holds up so much better than a lot of other games from the era. This game is really smooth to control in almost all aspects, helped largely by being compatible with a 3D control pad. It's so frustrating playing certain games that would have benefited so greatly from this controller, but being a late title, Saga obviously has no issues. Surprisingly, this game doesn't use tank controls for when you're running around, which totally threw me off guard. I have no problem with tank controls, and while dated, I never understood people complaining about them so much, but here it's not a worry. Now, there's no combat on foot. That stuff is only in the cutscenes, so these sections you just run around and talk to people, figure out where to go next, and buy supplies, so all you need to do is select things. These parts break up the game well enough and let some story creep in while the real fun is flying around. It's not difficult at all to get a grip on the flying, it's really smooth for such an old game. Rather than being locked on rails, the developers could go all out here and truly let you feel free with the movement. The old games felt pretty smooth as they were, especially the second game, so it really felt like a natural progression here. Moving around and just shooting stuff is satisfying, but the best part of this game isn't just the flying, it's the absolutely brilliant combat system. Yeah, even though the combat system is completely different to the other games, the devs fucking nailed it. So this system manages to have the vibe of a turn-based combat system while also not really being that at all. Basically, you're given a charge up meter that needs to be filled to be able to do any actions. You're given 3 bars, and while basic moves need 1 filled, others may need multiple. This bar stops moving when you decide to move around the combat space, so you have to be strategic with your movement. There's certain attack zones where your enemy will be able to fuck you up pretty bad, and staying free of that can come with its own challenges. Now, enemies can have weak spots themselves, and you will want to exploit this in order to finish off fights as quickly as possible. Dragging fights on too long and moving around too much hurts the amount of XP that you can gather, making leveling up slower. I think this is an awesome combat system. Want to use a healing item? Action move required. Change drag and combat settings? Action move required. It keeps you on your toes in big fights and can punish you for being unprepared. Berserk attacks will use up your BP bar, so you will need to plan using them a bit if you're low on refills, but these attacks can be incredibly satisfying to pull off in a big battle. That's if they work how you planned. Sometimes they do fuck all damage and can be really frustrating. The main thing you'll have to worry about though are the big multi-phase battles, which can go on for quite a while. Just when you think a battle is over, you might get sucked into fighting an enemy bigger and badder than the last one. These sections were really cool, and different enemies will need different approaches when fighting them. There really is a solid variety of enemies to fight too, so as you progress through the game you'll come across plenty of baddies with new attack styles, weak spots, and you will need to be patient at times, playing defensively rather than hitting heavy. Some of the enemies are totally unfazed by certain attacks, so you don't want to be caught up wasting your attacks and doing no damage. On some of these guys later on, it's literally better to just run away because you'll just be tanking hits. The combat system can occasionally be challenging, but I would say the game isn't that hard overall. I got my ass kicked a few times here and there, but never actually died in any of the battles, and to be honest, I'm not that fantastic at these games. You will get caught off guard here and there, and it does feel like you need to quickly adapt to certain battle patterns, but once you settle in, you can set yourself up to grind it out. This isn't as bad as it sounds. The game isn't broken or anything, far from it. If anything, it's quite approachable because it doesn't feel like the game is just cheating. There's so much to like about the flow of the combat system and the comfortable control of everything that it tends to overshadow a lot of the little things that could be picked apart, so it's easy to see why this game has the reputation that it does. So with that in mind, let's wrap this one up with my final thoughts. Alright, so this game is pretty awesome, and it's a shame that so many people were never exposed to this very impressive showcase of the system's hardware, but as one of the last games to come out for Western markets, it truly does send the system out on a high note. I haven't got much to really put the game down for. I mean, it's not a particularly long RPG, which you could see as good or bad, and the save points are well placed for the most part. I did get lost a bit here and there, but that's pretty standard affair for some of these old games, and aside from some sections that span battles, there's nothing I really found that truly dragged the game down. The story and combat systems in this game are incredible for 1998, and I think this game deserves a 9 out of 10. There's very little holding it back, and I did almost give it a 10. I recommend it for any retro game fan, but I do not recommend the price tag, so maybe seek out other means. Anyway, that's all from me today. I'll catch you next time.